Hey guys, tonight we are stripping bark off trees in Finland. Not exactly action-packed, I know, but sometimes the most boring stories are the ones where survival hangs by the thinnest, most fibrous thread. Imagine this, you're standing knee-deep in snow, the kind that silences the world around you. The air so cold it feels like tiny needles pricking your exposed skin. Flakes, fat and lazy at first, begin to fall with a quiet persistence. You've managed to land yourself in the middle of a Finnish winter, unprepared, under a sky that looks like a bruised cloud. You probably won't survive this, statistically speaking anyway, but we'll see. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. Curious where this sleepy survival journey takes you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Okay, so the snowflakes are getting serious now. They're no longer lazy, they're actively trying to bury you. You arrived in Finland, let's say, just a little too late in the season. Perhaps you were seeking solitude, a break from the relentless ding of notifications, or maybe you just really like the idea of seeing reindeer. Spoiler, they are probably smarter than you right now. Whatever brought you here, the Finnish winter has decided to roll out the white carpet and then pile several feet of it on top of you. The air is thick with falling snow, reducing visibility to mere yards. The gentle whisper of the first flakes has escalated into a rushing, swirling wall of white noise. It's not just snow falling, it's wind-whipped snow being thrown at you from all directions. You pull your inadequate hood tighter around your face, but the biting cold finds its way in, stinging your cheeks and making your nose run faster than a startled Arctic hare. You probably should have packed that extra thermal layer, huh? A classic beginner's mistake. Right up there with thinking you can outrun a bear, or that you can make a decent cup of coffee using just snow and desperation. You trudge forward, your boots sinking into the rapidly accumulating drifts. Each step is an effort, a heavy, tiring lift and placement that saps your energy faster than you'd like. The landscape is becoming a uniform white canvas, erasing familiar landmarks. Trees, once distinct sentinels, are blurring into ghostly shapes, their branches laden with snow, bending under the weight like arthritic fingers. The sheer scale of the whiteness is overwhelming, beautiful in a terrifying, desolate kind of way. It feels ancient, indifferent to your presence. Historically, survival in such conditions has always been a brutal test. Consider the winter war between Finland and the Soviet Union. Finnish soldiers, skilled skiers, and masters of camouflage often used the deep snow and harsh temperatures to their advantage against a much larger invading force. They knew this environment intimately. You, on the other hand, know it mostly from nature documentaries and maybe that one time you got stuck in a snowdrift on the way to work. Big difference. Your understanding of cold until now was perhaps needing an extra blanket or complaining about the heating bill. This is different. This is cold that feels like it's trying to suck the warmth right out of your bones, not just inconvenience you. A sudden gust of wind whips past, carrying a stinging spray of ice crystals. You instinctively turn your back, hunching your shoulders. It's a reminder that this isn't just pretty snow falling. It's a full-blown blizzard asserting its authority. The wind howls around you, a mournful, unending sound that amplifies the feeling of isolation. There's no one around for miles, perhaps for dozens of miles. Your situation is becoming critically clear. You are alone, exposed, and the weather is turning against you with serious intent. It's like Mother Nature decided to play a prank, but forgot the punchline and just kept going with the blizzard. You need shelter, urgently. The idea of just toughing it out, maybe finding a thick stand of pines to huddle under, quickly dissipates as the wind picks up force and the snow continues its relentless descent. A quirk of extreme cold is how quickly it can sap your core temperature, even if you don't feel immediately frozen. It's insidious, creeping in until shivering becomes uncontrollable and fine motor skills start to disappear. Some fringe theories even suggest that the monotonous white landscape can play tricks on your mind, leading to disorientation beyond just losing your way physically. Like the snow is not just burying the ground, but also your common sense. The silence beneath the storm's roar is profound. When the wind momentarily dips, the only sound is the soft shush of snow piling up in your own ragged breathing. You realize your fingers are starting to feel stiff inside your gloves. Your toes. Well, you'd rather not think about your toes right now. This is the point where the initial shock wears off and the grim reality sets in. You aren't going to be rescued anytime soon. You are in charge of your own immediate future, and that future looks cold, white, and increasingly desperate. Historians still argue whether early humans encountering similar harsh winters relied more on luck or innate knowledge passed down through generations. For you, it feels a lot like you're relying mostly on dumb luck and a vague memory of a survival show you once binge-watched. You push on, scanning the swirling white for anything that might offer refuge. An overhang, a dense thicket, maybe even a rock formation if you're incredibly lucky and the snow hasn't buried everything. Every step is a negotiation with the snow, every breath a gulp of icy air. The storm is more than just weather. It's becoming an opponent, a vast, indifferent force actively working against your meager efforts. The cold is no longer just uncomfortable, it's a palpable threat, and the snow keeps falling, unrelenting. Welcome to the boring, white-knuckle reality of simply trying not to freeze to death. You push on, every step a conscious act of will against the resistance of the snow and the biting wind. Your lungs burn with the effort of inhaling the frigid air. That casual stroll you envisioned through a winter wonderland has morphed into a brutal slog through a frozen nightmare. Your legs ache, your core feels like a block of ice despite the layers you did remember to put on. Patting yourself on the back for that small win, even as hypothermia taps you on the shoulder. The relentless white is starting to mess with your head. There's a disorienting sameness to everything. It's like walking on a giant, uneven marshmallow, except the marshmallow is trying to kill you. You squint through the driving snow, hoping against hope to see anything. A rock face, a cluster of trees so dense it might offer a windbreak, even a promisingly large snowdrift that looks like it could be hollowed out. This is where basic survival instincts kick in, the ones buried deep under layers of comfortable living and instant gratification. Your brain is screaming, "Shelter now," while your body is complaining about the cold and wondering if you remembered to DVR that show before you left. Spoiler alert, priorities have shifted dramatically. Historically, people surviving harsh winters often sought natural shelters. Indigenous groups in cold climates, like the Sami people of Scandinavia, were masters at reading the landscape, knowing which rock formations offered protection or how to create effective snow shelters like quinjees or igloos, which counterintuitively use snow's insulating properties to trap warmth. You, on the other hand, are mostly relying on the same technique you use to find your phone in a messy room. Just wandering around hoping to stumble over it. Efficiency level, low. Hope level, surprisingly high, mostly fueled by pure, unadulterated desperation. The wind suddenly whips harder, carrying a fresh blast of snow that feels like fine sandblasting. You instinctively duck your head, pulling your scarf tighter. As you do, you catch a glimpse through the swirling white, a darker shape, a slight disruption in the otherwise smooth, undulating drifts. It's not much, maybe just a large boulder or a dense clump of low-lying pines mostly buried, but it breaks the monotony of the pure white landscape. It's a beacon, a tiny flicker of possibility in the vast, indifferent white. Could this be it? Could this be your temporary reprieve? Moving towards it is another struggle. The snow here seems deeper. The wind funneled slightly, making the last few yards feel like wading through frozen concrete while someone blows an ice fan in your face. Your optimism is battling your exhaustion. Every muscle screams in protest. This is the point where you realize that survival isn't about epic battles against wolves, though that would at least be exciting. It's about the soul-crushing grind of putting one foot in front of the other when every fiber of your being wants to curl up and stop. And let's be honest, curling up out here ends with you becoming a snowdrift yourself. Probably wouldn't pass for art. As you get closer, the shape resolves slightly. It looks like a large, snow-covered mound, maybe a combination of rocks and accumulated snow. There seems to be a slight overhang, a small cavity partially shielded from the direct onslaught of the wind. It's not the cozy, well-built cabin with a crackling fire you were maybe subconsciously hoping for. Admit it, you were, but it's something. It's a potential windbreak, a place to huddle, a small pocket of slightly less terrible conditions. This is the difference between immediate danger and slightly less immediate danger, which in a blizzard is a huge win, like finding a slightly less soggy cracker in a box of stale ones. You take what you can get. A quirky tidbit about blizzards is that the sheer lack of visual stimuli combined with the physical exertion and cold can sometimes induce a state akin to whiteout hypnosis or spatial disorientation, making it incredibly hard to judge distance or direction. Your brain, deprived of normal reference points, starts making things up or getting confused. So is that shape real, or is it just your oxygen-starved brain playing tricks on you? Let's hope it's real, because hallucinating shelter is less than ideal right now. Imagine building an entire snow cave that isn't there. That's a survival fail for the record books. Historians still argue whether the human drive to seek shelter in extreme conditions is purely instinctual, a hardwired response refined over millennia of evolution, or if it's primarily a learned behavior, knowledge passed down through cultural practices and observation. For you, stumbling towards that promising lump in the snow, it feels pretty instinctual, like a very cold, very tired instinct. Your body is making the decision, your brain is mostly just along for the frozen, bumpy ride, muttering about poor life choices. You reach the mound, it's solid, real. Thank goodness. It's mostly a large, snow-covered rock formation with a slight indentation on the leeward side, the side away from the worst of the wind. Snow has piled up around it, creating a partial wall. It's far from perfect. The wind still whips around the edges and snow is still drifting in, but it offers a measure of protection, a slight reduction in the wind chill, a place where you can at least crouch down and be somewhat shielded. It's a start, a very, very humble cold start. Now, what do you do with this frozen indentation? You scramble the last few feet, dropping to your knees behind the partial protection of the rock formation. The immediate impact is subtle but noticeable. The wind's scream is slightly muffled, its icy claws scraping around you instead of directly at you. It's like swapping a full-body ice bath for just having your head dunked repeatedly. Progress. You hunch down, pulling your arms in, trying to make yourself as small a target for the elements as possible. Snow is still swirling in, dusting your face and shoulders, but it's less intense than being fully exposed. This isn't a dry, cozy cave, not by a long shot. It's more like a slight indentation in a giant, frozen rock covered in a blanket of snow that isn't quite thick enough. Your first instinct is to try and make it slightly more habitable. You use your gloved hands, thankfully still somewhat functional, though your fingers are starting to ache, to scrape away some of the loose snow that has accumulated in the hollow. It's slow, tedious work. The snow is powdery in places, crusty in others, and heavy where it's drifted deep. You're just creating a slightly larger, slightly less snow-filled puddle of misery to sit in. Every scoop feels like a monumental effort. This is the reality of primitive survival, isn't it? Less dramatic wolf fighting, more exhausting manual labor just to achieve a marginal improvement in your comfort level, which currently sits somewhere between terrible and slightly less terrible. You're basically a very cold, very inefficient snow shovel. As you work, you notice the limitations immediately. The overhang is minimal, offering maybe 2 feet of head clearance if you really hunch over. The sides are open, allowing wind and snow to funnel around the edges. It's a windbreak, yes, but far from a fortress. You try piling some of the scraped snow into a small wall on one side, but the wind just seems to laugh and blow it away or redistribute it elsewhere. It's like trying to argue with a force of nature using only your frozen mittens. You eventually give up on significant architectural improvements, realizing that the best you can do is just clear enough space to curl up and perhaps block a particularly nasty draft with your body. Luxury. Being relatively still for the first time in a while lets the true chills sink in. The frantic energy of movement kept some warmth going, but now, hunkered down, the cold feels like it's leaching the heat directly from your bones. Your clothes, while layered, aren't designed for extended exposure in these conditions. You can feel the dampness starting to creep in, especially where the snow has settled or you've brushed against a wet surface. And wet and freezing temperatures is a one-way ticket to hypothermia city. Population, potentially you. Your shivering starts subtly, then ramps up into a full-body tremor. It's your body's desperate attempt to generate heat, but it burns through energy quickly. Historically, early humans in various indigenous cultures developed incredibly sophisticated ways to deal with cold. From crafting layered clothing using natural materials like animal hides and furs, far superior to your fancy Gore-Tex knockoff right now, probably, to building insulated dwellings. Think of the pit houses or sod houses used in cold climates, which leverage the Earth's insulating properties. Or the detailed knowledge of fire making and fuel sources. You, unfortunately, seem to be lacking thousands of years of accumulated knowledge and the necessary tools. And all you have is a rock, some snow, and the dawning realization that you are profoundly unqualified for this adventure. Your fingers and toes are starting to feel less like parts of your body and more like foreign objects attached to you. Objects that are currently expressing their displeasure by throbbing and stinging. You try wiggling them inside your boots and gloves, a movement that feels clumsy and ineffective. You need to keep the blood circulating. That much you remember from some vague health class lecture you probably slept through. This is the boring, tedious, uncomfortable reality of survival. Managing tiny, miserable problems like keeping your digits attached, rather than starring in a dramatic montage of overcoming impossible odds. It's mostly just cold and damp. A quirky tidbit related to extreme cold is that your sense of thirst can actually be suppressed, even though you're losing moisture through respiration and sweating under your layers. Your body prioritizes keeping core organs warm, and that can mess with the signals for dehydration. So while your primary sensation is bone-chilling cold, you might also be slowly getting dehydrated without even realizing it. Your mouth feels a bit dry, but you attributed that to the wind. See? Even the simple, essential needs get complicated and sneaky out here. It's like your body is playing a cruel game of hide-and-seek with basic survival signals. Historians still argue whether the primary driver of early human migration into colder climates was resource availability, following prey animals, or if it was more related to population pressure, forcing groups into less desirable territories. For you, currently huddled behind a rock, the only pressure you feel is the crushing weight of the cold and the urgent need to not become a human icicle. Migration is definitely off the table right now. The only movement you are considering is maybe inching slightly closer to the rock face to block a particularly icy gust. You shift position, trying to find a way to sit or crouch that offers maximum protection and minimum discomfort. It's a losing battle. The ground is cold, the air is cold, everything is cold. You pull your knees to your chest, wrapping your arms around yourself. This is it, your grand shelter. A slightly less windy spot to shiver uncontrollably. The snow continues to fall relentlessly, silently burying the world in white. You watch the flakes drift past the opening, a never-ending curtain of cold. You need to conserve energy. You need to stay as dry as possible. You need a lot of things, most of which seem entirely unavailable right now. You close your eyes for a moment, just for a second of reprieve, but the cold jolts you back to awareness. No sleeping yet. That would be ill-advised, let's say. Huddled here, shivering behind the rock, the immediate need for shelter has been minimally addressed. Now your mind, slowly thawing from the immediate shock of the cold, turns to the next problem. Food. You instinctively pat your pockets, then fumble with the small pack or bag you manage to grab in the haste of whatever this situation is. Your fingers, still clumsy and aching inside your gloves, make slow work of unzipping or opening it. This isn't the satisfying rip of high-tech survival gear being accessed. It's more like trying to operate a complex piece of machinery with 2 frozen sausages. Inside, you find the meager collection of items you brought. There's a small, sturdy axe, good for chopping wood, if you could find any wood that wasn't buried under 10 feet of snow, and frozen solid. There's a metal pot, maybe for boiling water, or making something. And then there's the main event, the pièce de résistance, the reason you are theoretically going to survive, a heavy sack filled with what was optimistically labeled bark flour. You pull it out, the rough fabric stiff with cold. You untie the string holding it closed and peer inside. It's not like wheat flour. It's coarse, grayish-brown, and smells faintly of damp earth and something woody, which makes sense considering what it is. This isn't just some rustic, artisanal baking ingredient. This is literally ground-up tree bark, likely the inner bark, cambium, of pine or spruce, traditionally used in times of extreme famine in northern climates when crops failed. Looking at it, the word flour feels like a cruel marketing ploy. It looks and feels more like sawdust that's been left out in the rain. Your appetite, already suppressed by the cold and general misery, takes another nosedive. This is dinner and breakfast and lunch for potentially a very long time. This makes that week you tried intermittent fasting seem like an all-you-can-eat buffet. You carefully put the axe and pot back, then tie the bark flour bag shut again. It's a heavy, disheartening weight. Beyond these few things, your inventory is depressingly thin. No fire starter. Matches or a lighter would have been nice, wouldn't they? A survival knife that wasn't just the dull thing on your multi-tool. A map that wasn't for a different part of the world. A satellite phone to call for rescue and perhaps order a hot pizza. Nope, just you, a rock, the cold, and a sack of tree bark. This is less prepared for anything and more optimistically grabbed a few items that seem vaguely useful before wandering into the wilderness. The grim reality sets in. The most immediate problem is staying warm, yes, but the long-term, soul-crushing problem is sustenance. You have no conventional food. Nothing remotely palatable or energy-dense, just the bark. You try to remember everything you have ever heard about eating bark. You recall reading somewhere that the inner bark does contain some carbohydrates and vitamins, enough to keep you alive technically, but it's incredibly low in calories and difficult to digest. People who relied on it historically often suffered from malnutrition and digestive issues. It wasn't a choice. It was a last resort against starvation. Thinking about the nutritional value is almost funny in a dark way. You're less worried about hitting your macros and more worried about whether this stuff will just pass straight through you, or worse, get stuck. Historically, using bark as a food source, particularly the inner bark of certain trees like pine, spruce, and birch, was a known practice in many cultures during periods of scarcity. In Finland, it was a critical famine food, sometimes mixed with small amounts of rye flour or other meager grains to make a coarse, dark bread called petulaipa, or bark bread. Imagine that. The highlight of your meal is the non-bark ingredient. It wasn't delicious or even filling in a satisfying way, but it kept people from starving to death when crops failed or war ravaged the land. Your situation, while maybe not wartime, certainly qualifies as a period of extreme scarcity. A quirky tidbit is that some trees have much more palatable inner bark than others. The cambium layer varies in sweetness and texture depending on the species and the time of year. Spring bark, when the sap is flowing, is supposedly the most tender and nutritious. You have absolutely no idea what kind of tree your bark came from or when it was harvested. For all you know, you've got the equivalent of woody cardboard dust. The universe, it seems, has a peculiar sense of humor. You can almost hear it chuckling, "Enjoy your gourmet wood chips." Historians still argue whether the widespread reliance on famine foods like bark bread significantly contributed to long-term health issues and population declines during historical famines, or if the sheer prevention of immediate starvation was the overwhelming benefit. For you, the debate feels very immediate and personal. Your potential long-term health issue is not surviving the next few days. So the short-term benefit of having something to eat, no matter how unappealing, feels pretty significant right now. Though the thought of actually eating it is deeply unappealing. You carefully place the sack of bark flour back in your pack, tucking it away as if hiding it might make the reality less potent. But it sits there, a constant, heavy reminder of your predicament. It's cold, you're shivering, and your dinner is tree guts. This isn't exactly the triumphant beginning of a survival saga. It feels more like the prologue to a very uncomfortable nap, followed by slow-motion despair. You try to shift again, pressing your back against the cold rock face, attempting to draw any residual warmth from it, which is, of course, futile. The wind continues to howl around your inadequate shelter, and the snow keeps falling. The bark flower waits. The sack of bark flower sits like a lead weight in your pack, and in your stomach conceptually. It's the centerpiece of your survival strategy, which right now feels less like a strategy and more like a slow capitulation to the inevitable. You know, intellectually, that you have to eat eventually. The body needs fuel, but the thought of turning that gritty dust into something resembling food, it feels like a task requiring resources you simply don't possess. Traditional methods for making bark edible, even petulaipi, usually involve boiling or baking. Boiling helps break down some of the tough fibers and make the limited nutrients more accessible. Baking, especially when mixed with grain, makes it, well, less like eating raw wood. Both require fire. A fire would also solve your more immediate problem of being intensely, painfully cold. The lack of any means to make fire is starting to feel less like an oversight and more like a cosmic joke tailored specifically for your misery. No matches, no lighter, not even a ferro rod or flint and steel. Just cold hands and a sack of nature's most reluctant food source. You glance at the small metal pot you found in your pack. It's useless without fire, unless you could use it to somehow melt snow. Water. You're surrounded by it, but it's all frozen solid or falling as dry, powdery flakes. You need liquid water to boil bark flower, presumably, or at the very least, to drink. Dehydration is a risk even in extreme cold, as your body expends energy just staying warm and you lose moisture through breathing. Eating dry, dusty bark flower without water sounds like a quick way to choke or turn your insides into a petrified forest. So, step 1, get water. With no fire, your options are limited. You could try eating handfuls of snow, but that's a terrible idea. It rapidly lowers your core body temperature, potentially triggering hypothermia. Plus, you'd have to eat an absolutely monumental amount of snow to get a decent drink's worth of water, turning your mouth and stomach into ice boxes in the process. Imagine trying to quench your thirst with frozen slushies, except the slushies are actively trying to kill you. Hard pass. The other option, the only one that seems even remotely feasible without fire, is to melt snow slowly using body heat, or perhaps the meager residual warmth of the pot itself, if you kept it inside your layers. You decide to try the pot method. You scrape some clean snow into the pot. The fine, dry powder doesn't pack well, so you need a surprising amount to fill the bottom. You tuck the pot inside your jacket, against your core, hoping your body heat, already struggling against the cold, will somehow transfer enough energy to turn the snow into liquid water. It's a slow, agonizing process. You can feel the cold metal against your skin, leaching warmth away. The snow inside seems stubbornly resistant to change. It just sits there, mocking you with its frozen indifference. You hug the pot tighter, trying to will the water into existence. It's like trying to hatch an egg using only stern glares. You remember learning about phase changes in school, how much energy it takes to melt ice into water, and then water into steam. Right now, simply melting snow feels like a monumental scientific undertaking, requiring vast amounts of power you simply don't have to spare. Every calorie burn generating body heat to melt this minuscule amount of snow is a calorie you won't have later. This suddenly feels like the most expensive glass of water in human history. After what feels like an eternity, maybe 20 minutes, maybe an hour. Time gets weird in the cold. You finally manage to melt perhaps a quarter-inch of water at the bottom of the pot. It's a pathetic amount, barely enough to wet your tongue, let alone make bark flower paste. But it's water, liquid water, a tiny victory in a sea of overwhelming defeat. The snow on top is still resolutely frozen. You could try to add more snow, but the first batch hasn't even fully melted, and your core is starting to feel dangerously chilled from the heat loss. This isn't sustainable. The bark flower preparation is clearly off the table for now, not just because you can't boil it, but because you can barely produce enough water to drink, let alone mix into a dough or slurry. You look at the sack again. Maybe you could just eat it dry, raw. The thought is revolting. You imagine trying to swallow handfuls of dry, woody powder. It would be like eating cinnamon challenge material, but less spicy and far more likely to shred your esophagus. You try to picture yourself chewing on tree bark. It doesn't improve the mental image. Your ancestors who ate this stuff must have been truly desperate. Or perhaps they had better preparation techniques and didn't have to rely on body heat melted snow. A historical fact about famine foods like this: while bark was used, other desperate measures included eating lichen, moss, and even boiling leather. Boiling leather for days could extract a tiny amount of gelatin and grease, providing minimal calories. Compared to that, bark flour starts looking marginally more appealing, but only marginally. You're still firmly in the zero appeal zone. A quirky tidbit about melting snow: the shape of snowflakes actually affects how easily they melt. Complex dendritic crystals, the classic snowflake shape, melt slower than simpler crystal forms like needles or columns, even at the same temperature, because they have a higher surface area to volume ratio, which influences heat transfer. So maybe the type of snowflakes currently falling is conspiring against your body heat melting efforts. It's a ridiculous thought, but in your current state, blaming the geometry of frozen water feels strangely comforting. Historians still argue whether the psychological impact of relying on deeply unpalatable famine foods exacerbated the physical suffering during historical crises, or if the simple act of having something to eat, no matter how bad, provided crucial mental resilience. Right now, the psychological impact is definitely a factor. The sight, smell, and texture of that bark flour are profoundly depressing. It's hard to feel hopeful about survival when your main food source smells like dirt and disappointment. You pour the tiny puddle of melted water into your palm and carefully sip it. It's ice cold and tastes faintly metallic from the pot, but it's water, a precious, hard-won drop of hydration. You know you can't sustain this method for getting enough water to survive, let alone prepare food. The energy cost is too high and the yield is too low. You need fire, or a miracle, or maybe the bark flour is just for show, and you'll wake up from this weird cold dream soon. You tuck the pot away, the cold radiating from it, a constant reminder of your limitations. The wind whips around your rock, and the snow continues its relentless descent, burying the world and your hopes in a soft, white blanket. The failure to produce even a decent sip of water with your body heat brings a harsh reality crashing down. You need fire, not just for melting snow efficiently, but for attempting to make that bark flour into something, anything that might pass for sustenance, and most critically, for warmth. The cold is no longer a discomfort, it's a creeping existential threat. It sinks into your bones, making every movement an effort, every thought a struggle. So you have to search for firewood, right now. Despite the storm, despite the exhaustion, despite the fact that everything is buried under what feels like half a meter of snow. Leaving the relative shelter of your rock feels like stepping off a cliff into a frozen ocean. The wind immediately assaults you, carrying stinging snow that finds every gap in your clothing. Each step is a conscious decision, a heavy lift of your foot from the deep snow, a push forward, and a sink down again. It's incredibly slow going. The trees around you, mostly spruce and pine, stand like silent, white-coated sentinels, offering no easy answers. You look for fallen branches, for deadfall, for anything that isn't completely green and living. But the snow is a cruel blanket. It hides everything. What looks like a promising lump could just be a snowdrift over a small bush. You prod at mounds with your foot, hoping to hit something hard and woody, but mostly you just disturb more snow, which swirls up and blinds you for a moment. You stumble, catch yourself, your muscles protesting with dull aches. The cold bites at your exposed hands, even through gloves, as you occasionally try to brush snow off what might be a log. It's usually just a rock, or more snow. The silence of the forest, broken only by the howl of the wind and the muffled crunch of your own footsteps, is immense. It feels like you're the only living thing in this vast, white emptiness. You scan the base of trees for dead lower branches, but they're either covered in snow, or too green, or too small to be worth the effort. Finding usable firewood in these conditions is a monumental task. You need wood that's dry enough to burn, or at least partially sheltered from the worst of the moisture. Dead branches still attached to standing trees are sometimes drier than those on the ground, but reaching them requires effort you might not have. You trudge onward, circumnavigating larger drifts, peering into the gloom of the forest. It's a monotonous, draining process. Lift, step, sink, lift, step, sink. Your breathing is heavy, turning into plumes of white vapor that disappear instantly in the air. You feel a flicker of absurdity in this grim pursuit. You're literally walking in circles, hoping to find flammable material in a frozen wilderness, all so you can maybe eat some tree bark later. It's like the universe's most depressing scavenger hunt, with the grand prize being slightly less miserable starvation. Maybe there's a hidden cache of dry tinder just over that drift? Probably not. It's probably just more snow. After what feels like hours, though it could be far less, you spot something promising. A dead branch, thicker than your arm, appears to be leaning against a tree trunk, slightly elevated off the ground. It has a grayish, weathered look, suggesting it might be dry enough. You approach it, pushing through a particularly deep drift that comes up to your waist. The wood is heavy, and you have to wrestle it free from where it's partially embedded in the snow. It's not perfectly dry. The surface feels damp, but it's much better than anything else you've found. You break off smaller pieces, testing their brittleness. They snap with a satisfying sound, a small victory. You start gathering smaller twigs and branches, stuffing them inside your jacket, where they can hopefully dry slightly from your body heat. Another attempt at body heat-powered processing. This feels like a slightly more logical application than melting snow, but also significantly increases your bulk, making moving even harder. You look for tinder too, anything fine and dry that will catch a spark easily. Pine needles maybe? Dry grass stems sticking out of the snow? It's all challenging. You scrape at the bark of some dead branches, hoping to find dry wood underneath. The exhaustion is starting to bite. Your legs ache, your lungs burn from the cold air, and your fingers are stiff despite your gloves. The frustration is a cold knot in your stomach, mingling with the hunger pangs you're trying to ignore. You haven't found enough wood for a significant fire. Maybe just enough for a small, brief one, and you still have no way to ignite it anyway. It feels like you're collecting ingredients for a recipe you don't have the final, crucial step for. It's like baking a cake but realizing you don't have an oven, or eggs, or flour unless you count the bark, which you really shouldn't. A historical fact, in the Great Famine of Finland, 1866 to 1868, lack of fuel to cook meager rations, including bark bread components or mosses, was a significant cause of death. People would spend precious energy foraging for wood, often in deep snow, only to find damp or insufficient material. The energy expended could outweigh the calories gained, and the cold exacerbated malnutrition. The sheer effort you're putting in right now feels grimly aligned with those desperate accounts. A quirky tidbit, even seemingly dead wood absorbs moisture from the air and snow. The center of a piece of wood might be drier than the surface, which is why splitting larger pieces can expose better burning material. However, you'd need an axe or knife for splitting, neither of which you possess. So you're stuck with surface-level assessments and hoping for the best. Maybe this damp branch is drier on the inside? You'll never know unless you can somehow break it open. Historians still argue whether the widespread deforestation caused by desperate people searching for fuel during historical famines had long-term ecological impacts, or if the rate of forest regeneration in subsequent years was sufficient to recover. Right now, you're probably not making a dent in the Finnish forest ecosystem, but the thought of the sheer volume of wood needed to keep warm for days is staggering. You've barely found enough for an hour, maybe less, and it's damp. You gather the few pieces you've managed to find, hugging them against your chest for a brief, futile attempt at drying. It's a pathetic haul. The reality sinks in again. Finding fuel in a snowstorm without tools or prior preparation is almost impossible. You need to find a better source, a windfall under some kind of shelter, or perhaps a different strategy entirely. But for now, this small pile of damp sticks is all you have. You turn back towards the faint outline of the rock shelter, the wind pushing against you. the snow continuing its silent, persistent fall. The search for firewood has only deepened your exhaustion and highlighted the near impossibility of your situation. It feels like digging a hole to fill another hole. Returning to the slight depression under the rock feels like a small, almost negligible victory. You dump the handful of damp sticks you managed to gather onto the snow near where you had been attempting to melt snow earlier. It's a pathetic pile. You eye it with deep skepticism. This is supposed to save you? This collection of soggy kindling and slightly less soggy branches? It looks less like firewood and more like an optimistic beaver's failed attempt at building a dam in a blizzard. You sigh, a puff of white mist, and feel a wave of weariness wash over you. Finding wood was difficult, but now the real challenge begins, making it burn. For fire, you don't just need fuel, you need tinder. That magical, fluffy, incredibly dry material that will catch the smallest spark or flame and hold it long enough to ignite slightly larger kindling, which then might ignite your damp sticks. In a dry environment, tinder is relatively easy to find. Dry grass, bark shavings, bird nests. Here, in a snowstorm, under a blanket of white that seems determined to quench any possibility of warmth, tinder is the stuff of fairy tales. You need to find something that has remained miraculously dry despite everything nature is throwing at you. You start scouring the area immediately around the rock shelter. You get down on your hands and knees, peering into crevices, running your gloved fingers along the undersides of overhangs. The snow hasn't drifted right into this spot, but the air is thick with moisture, and everything feels damp to the touch. You scrape at the base of the rock, hoping to find a pocket of dry earth or some sheltered, dead leaves. You find frozen dirt and slick, cold stone. Not promising. You move to the edges of the rock, where the snow starts to pile up. You poke and prod at the ground near tree trunks, searching for anything that might have been sheltered from the direct snowfall. Maybe some dry pine needles caught under a root, maybe some old dry moss tucked away in a crevice. You pull back a layer of snow and find wet earth. You brush snow off the lower trunk of a nearby pine, hoping to find some flaky, dry bark you can scrape off. Most of it is covered in a thin layer of ice, or is simply too green and wet. It's like trying to find a specific grain of sand on a beach, except the beach is covered in a wet blanket and you're wearing mittens. The frustration is a cold, bitter taste in your mouth. Every potential patch of dryness turns out to be a mirage. You try scraping the inner bark from a small, dead twig you found earlier, hoping it might be drier. You manage to get a few fibrous strands, but they feel cool and slightly damp against your fingers. You gather them into a small, hopeful pile near the damp sticks. It's maybe enough to burn for 3 seconds, assuming you could even light it. This desperate scrabble highlights the fundamental problem. You don't have a fire starter. No matches, no lighter, no ferro rod, nothing. All this effort gathering wood, searching for tinder, is ultimately pointless without the means to create a spark or flame. It's like having all the ingredients for a magnificent cake, but no way to turn on the oven. Or perhaps more accurately, given your current diet, like having all the ingredients for a magnificent bowl of bark gruel, but no way to heat the water. And you still don't have water, come to think of it. You really are collecting ingredients for a meal you can't cook using methods you can't employ. The wind howls outside the shelter, a constant reminder of the cold you're trying to fight. You huddle deeper into yourself, watching the snowflakes drift down. Your fingers are growing stiff again despite the gloves, the cold seeping in with every touch of snow or damp bark. You rub your hands together, trying to generate some friction, some warmth. It's a futile gesture, like trying to heat a room with a candle. A quirky tidbit: in truly desperate survival situations without modern tools, historical accounts mention people trying to start fires using friction methods like a bow drill or hand drill. However, these require specific types of dry wood for the spindle and hearthboard, significant skill, immense physical effort, and bone-dry tinder. Attempting one in sub-zero temperatures with damp materials and frozen fingers is practically impossible, likely expending more energy than you could ever hope to recover from a fire you couldn't even start. The thought of trying to spin a stick fast enough to create an ember right now feels absurdly comical, like trying to knit a jumper with frozen spaghetti. You continue your search, albeit with diminishing hope. You examine the base of the rock again, looking for any cracks or overhangs that might have sheltered some dry organic matter. You find a small cluster of dead leaves tucked partially under a stone. You gingerly reach for them, hoping against hope. They are cold and brittle, but remarkably, slightly less wet than everything else. Not dry, not by a long shot, but they crumble into smaller pieces when you gently crush them. This is the closest thing to tinder you have found. You carefully add the small handful of leaf fragments to your pathetic pile of damp twigs and slightly less damp bark scrapings. It looks profoundly inadequate. Historians still argue whether the knowledge of fire-making techniques was as universally distributed among indigenous populations in harsh climates as often assumed, or if it was a specialized skill passed down through certain individuals or families. Regardless, for you right now, lacking even basic tools, the knowledge doesn't matter. The means are simply absent. You could know the perfect combination of wood and technique for a bow drill, but without the right dry materials and functional limbs, it's useless theory. A mainstream historical fact. Fire was absolutely crucial for survival in cold climates, not just for warmth, but for making many foods digestible and safe. Without fire, things like tough roots, some mushrooms, and even potential sources of protein become much harder to process and gain energy from. Your potential bark flower, if you ever manage to scrape enough inner bark, would need heat to become even remotely palatable or digestible, if it's anything like historical examples of bark bread components, which were often boiled or baked. So the lack of fire is not just a comfort issue, it's a major barrier to accessing any potential food source you might scrounge up. You sit back on your heels, the snow chilling your knees even through your layers. You look at the small, sad collection of damp fuel and marginally less damp tinder. You look at your empty hands. The reality is a heavy weight in your chest. You have no fire starter. Without ignition, this is just a pile of wet debris. It won't provide warmth. It won't boil water. It won't make bark edible. It's just sticks and leaves, a monument to futile effort. The cold feels more menacing now, not just because it's external, but because your primary tool for fighting it is locked away behind an insurmountable barrier. The need for a spark you cannot create. It feels like standing at a locked door holding the key, but realizing you don't have hands to turn it. Except you don't even have the key, or the hands, just the door. You shiver, a deep, uncontrollable tremor that shakes your whole body. The search for tinder and the stark realization of your inability to light a fire have drained you completely. It's time to retreat back into the shelter's meager protection and try to conserve what little energy and warmth you have left. The storm shows no sign of abating. The possibility of warmth feels more distant than ever. Retreating back into the slight depression under the rock feels less like entering a warm haven and more like stepping into a slightly less aggressive refrigerator. The wind still whips around the edges, but the direct blast is somewhat mitigated. Snowdrifts pile up outside the immediate alcove, forming natural barriers. But they aren't solid walls, and every gust seems to find a new seam to exploit. You drop to your knees, hunching over, trying to occupy as little space as possible to conserve heat. Your breath mists immediately, hanging in the frigid air before dissipating. Okay, shelter. It's generous. It's more like a designated spot to shiver that isn't directly in the open blizzard. A participation trophy of a shelter. You look around at the damp ground, the rock face pressing close, the pathetic pile of wet sticks nearby. It occurs to you that maybe you can make this glorified cold spot marginally less terrible. The most immediate problem, besides the soul-crushing cold and lack of fire, is the wind sneaking in around the edges of the rock. You decide to try and reinforce the natural snowdrifts. Using your gloved hands, you scoop up handfuls of loose snow from the drifts outside and pack them into the small gaps where the wind seems to be funneling in. It's tedious, back-breaking work, and your hands, despite the gloves, quickly become numb claws. The snow is dry and powdery in some spots, wet and heavy in others. You pat it down, trying to build up the walls, hoping to create a more enclosed space. It's like trying to build a sandcastle in a monsoon, only colder and with snow instead of sand. Every time a stronger gust hits, you half expect your carefully packed snow wall to just dissolve into the air. It feels profoundly temporary, like putting a band-aid on a gaping wound. You also grab a few of the larger, wetter branches from your collection, the ones you now know you can't burn. Maybe they can serve as a rudimentary windbreak. You try propping them up against the snow walls or leaning them against the rock face at the entrance. They are stiff, cold, and heavy, and they don't really stay where you put them. They mostly just lean precariously or slide down, adding to the general clutter and dampness of your tiny refuge. You look at your handiwork. It's something. A slight improvement? Possibly. It feels more like you've just artfully arranged some frozen firewood rejects. Despite your best efforts, the cold is relentless. It seeps up from the ground, radiating through your clothes. It bites at your exposed skin, even just your face. It feels like it's vibrating in your bones. You pull your arms tighter around yourself, trying to trap whatever body heat you can. You tuck your chin down, trying to shield your neck. Every movement feels sluggish. Every breath a cold shock to your lungs. This isn't the dramatic, sudden onset of hypothermia you might see in movies. It's a slow, creeping, pervasive chill that drains your energy and resolves centimeter by centimeter. It's the kind of cold that makes you question your life choices, specifically the one where you decided pretending to survive in a Finnish snowstorm for entertainment was a good idea. A quirkier tidbit. Historically, inhabitants of extremely cold regions often developed incredibly effective, yet sometimes counterintuitive methods for staying warm. For example, while dampness is generally your enemy, certain types of snow shelters like igloos or snow caves actually use the insulating properties of compacted snow effectively, trapping body heat inside and blocking wind. The structure you're in isn't quite that, it's just a rocky overhang with some snow piled around it. But the principle of using the available environment to your advantage is universal. Still, building a proper snow cave requires specific snow conditions, the right tools, and significant energy, resources you currently lack in abundance. Trying to carve out a snow cave with just your gloved hands feels about as feasible as trying to excavate the Panama Canal with a teaspoon. You shift position, trying to get comfortable on the uneven, frozen ground. It's impossible. Every bump and hollow presses into your body. You try sitting with your legs tucked up, then lying curled on your side. Neither feels remotely restful or warm. The cold permeates everything. Your clothes, which felt reasonably dry hours ago, now feel heavy and slightly damp, a result of trapped perspiration or just the sheer humidity of the cold air. That slight dampness acts like a superhighway for the cold, drawing heat away from your body constantly. Historians still argue whether the primary driver for human migration into colder northern latitudes was purely driven by resource availability, or if the development of advanced technologies like effective shelter, clothing, and fire control were equally significant factors that enabled sustained habitation in such harsh environments. It's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. Did they go north because they could survive, or did they develop survival methods because they were there? For you, currently lacking several of those key advanced technologies, the question feels less academic and more acutely personal. Surviving here without them feels unlikely. A mainstream historical fact. Proper shelter in cold climates wasn't just about blocking wind and snow. It was critically about insulation and elevation. Historically, homes in cold regions often had thick walls, made of earth, logs, or snow blockings, minimal openings, and sometimes even raised floors or sleeping platforms to get away from the coldest air pooling near the ground. Your rock overhang, while providing some barrier, offers zero insulation from the rock itself or the frozen ground beneath you, and you are very much at ground level, right in the coldest layer of air. It's the difference between sleeping in a tent versus sleeping directly on an ice rink. You huddle deeper, pulling your knees to your chest. The minimal improvements you attempted feel utterly negligible now. The cold is still here, a constant pressing weight. You close your eyes for a moment, trying to find some peace, some escape, but the cold is too insistent. It demands your attention, reminding you of your vulnerability. The dream of bark flower gruel, warm and perhaps even slightly nourishing, feels like a cruel joke given the lack of fire. The damp wood pile sits outside your immediate huddle space, a monument to your failure to secure the most basic tool for survival. Despite the shelter, despite your layers of clothing, you are cold, deeply, fundamentally cold. It's the kind of cold that makes thinking difficult, that saps motivation, that whispers insidious doubts in your ear. This is pointless, it seems to say. You can't get warm. You can't make fire. You can't even find dry tinder. You push the thoughts away, but they linger like the chill in the air. The effort to improve the shelter was a distraction, a way to feel like you were doing something. But the core problem remains. You are cold, alone, and unprepared, in a place that seems determined to highlight every single one of your shortcomings. The wind continues to moan outside, and the snow continues to fall, muffling the world, but amplifying your isolation and the bone-chilling cold that is your only companion. The cold is no longer just outside. It's inside. It feels like it's leached into your bones, saturated your muscles, settled in the very core of your being. The meager adjustments you made to the shelter seem laughable now, utterly ineffective against this pervasive chill. You're shivering, but it's not the violent, uncontrolled shaking you might expect. It's a deep internal tremor, a constant vibration that hums beneath your skin. Your teeth are clenched, jaw tight, constantly trying to prevent them from chattering, a losing battle. Your fingers and toes feel distant, separate appendages. Even through the gloves, they feel like frozen sausages, stiff and unresponsive. You flex them, trying to bring some sensation back, but it's mostly a dull ache. The exposed skin on your face is numb, tight, and dry. Every breath you take through your nose feels like inhaling tiny ice shards, and breathing through your mouth just makes your throat burn with cold. Beyond the physical discomfort, there's a creeping mental lethargy. Thinking is hard. Simple tasks, like deciding whether to shift position or try to rub some warmth into your hands, feel monumental. Your mind feels foggy, slow, like a computer running ancient software on a frozen hard drive. It's difficult to focus, to string coherent thoughts together. The sense of purpose that might have driven you earlier, find wood, make fire, build shelter, is eroding, replaced by a dull, heavy apathy. What's the point? The cold will just win anyway. This is where survival gets truly boring, actually. It's not always a dramatic fight against a bear or a daring rescue. A lot of the time, it's just being cold and calm and tired, and trying to remember why you should care enough to keep trying when your body is screaming at you to just curl up and stop. It's the subtle, insidious erosion of will, like trying to assemble IKEA furniture after a sleepless night and several pints. Everything seems overly complicated, the instructions make no sense, and you'd really rather just lie on the floor. You look at the pile of damp branches again. The thought of trying to make fire seems impossible. Where would you even start? Everything is wet, your hands are numb, your brain feels like it's padded with cotton wool. The energy required, the sheer will needed to painstakingly shave tiny curls from a wet stick, to find a single dry piece of fluff, to generate a spark with numb fingers. It feels like trying to climb Everest in flip-flops. Your previous attempts feel like a dim, distant memory, a futile burst of energy in a losing game. This mental state is a classic sign of early hypothermia and severe fatigue. The body, trying to conserve energy, starts shutting down non-essential functions. And unfortunately, high-level cognitive processing seems to be on the non-essential list. You start making poor decisions or no decisions at all. You become indifferent to your surroundings, even to the danger. It's a dangerous trap, this apathy. It feels peaceful in a way to just stop struggling. But that peace is the prelude to something much worse. A quirkier tidbit about the mind under duress. Studies on individuals in extreme environments, including polar explorers or solo sailors, have documented instances of vivid hallucinations or imaginary companions emerging as coping mechanisms, or simply due to sleep deprivation, isolation, and stress. While you're not quite seeing talking reindeer yet, The edges of your thoughts are starting to blur. You might momentarily think you heard a voice or saw a flicker of movement that wasn't there. Your brain, it seems, is getting a bit creative when it comes to entertaining itself in the face of misery. You try to recall anything useful you might have learned about this state. Hydration is key, but the snow you melted earlier feels impossibly cold, and drinking it just makes you feel colder inside. Food provides energy, but the thought of chewing on that tasteless bark flower feels like an insurmountable effort. And without fire, it's cold and gritty. Everything feels like a chore, a burden. Historians still argue whether the remarkable resilience shown by some individuals in extreme historical survival situations was primarily due to innate psychological fortitude, learned skills and preparation, or simply sheer blind luck. Was Shackleton's survival due to his leadership and mental strength, or the specific circumstances that unfolded? Was it the stoicism of those who endured brutal winters with limited resources, or the practical knowledge passed down through generations? For you, huddled in this freezing alcove, the question feels pressing. Do you have that innate fortitude? Do you have the skills? Or are you just waiting for luck to run out? A mainstream historical fact: prolonged exposure to cold doesn't just risk hypothermia, it also severely degrades manual dexterity, reaction time, and decision-making abilities. The famous example of the Donner Party isn't just about starvation and desperation. The extreme cold of the Sierra Nevada mountains significantly hampered their ability to build effective shelter, hunt, and even think clearly about routes and strategies, contributing directly to the tragedy. Your current difficulty with fine motor skills, like trying to tie a knot or manipulate tiny objects, and the sluggishness of your mind are direct parallels, albeit hopefully on a less fatal scale. You slump further down, trying to find a position where the cold doesn't feel quite so piercing, but there isn't one. The ground is cold, the rock behind you is cold, the air around you is cold. It's a 360-degree assault. Your earlier attempts to reinforce the snowdrifts or prop up branches feel like the frantic, irrational actions of someone already losing the fight. You expended precious energy for minimal, almost negligible gain. It's discouraging, deeply discouraging. The cold whispers doubts. You're not cut out for this, it says. Look at you. Can't even make a fire. Can't find a proper shelter. You're just getting colder, weaker. It's hard to argue with that voice. It feels true. Every shiver, every ache, every sluggish thought confirms its message. The romantic idea of survival, the grit and determination, feels like something from movies, not this dull, painful reality. You just feel tired. So tired. More tired than you've ever been in your life. A bone-deep exhaustion that the cold seems to amplify rather than alleviate. Sleep seems like a distant, impossible luxury, yet the urge to just close your eyes and drift away is incredibly strong. It's a dangerous urge. The cold is relentless, a physical weight pressing down on you. Every muscle aches, not just from exertion, but from the constant tension of shivering, the body trying desperately to generate heat. You try to pull your knees tighter to your chest, hunch your shoulders, but the movement is stiff and slow, like your joints are packed with ice. The air in your lungs feels thin and sharp, and you find yourself taking shallower breaths, as if deep inhales might freeze your insides solid. This is the point where the brain starts making deals with the body. Just rest, the body whispers. Stop fighting. It's okay. And the brain, starved for oxygen and warmth, finds that prospect incredibly appealing. The struggle for survival is exhausting, physically and mentally. Giving up in this state feels less like failure and more like a sweet, inevitable release from pain. It's a sneaky kind of peace, but there's still a flicker, a tiny ember of resistance. It might be instinct, or maybe just a stubborn refusal to let the finished snowstorm win. This resistance reminds you that you need energy, you need calories, you need food. Your gaze drifts to the small, pitiful stash of bark flour. It's in a makeshift pouch, looking less like sustenance and more like particularly unappealing sawdust mixed with regret. Remember gathering that? The scraping, the pounding, the quiet desperation? It feels like a lifetime ago, Trying to consume it now feels like a monumental task. Your hands are numb, fumbling with the pouch. Opening it seems overly complicated. You manage to scoop a small amount onto a frozen, repurposed leaf, or maybe it's just a chunk of frozen snow. It's hard to tell. The light is fading and your vision feels a bit blurred around the edges. You bring the powdery substance towards your mouth. It's dry, terribly, incredibly dry, like swallowing dust from a very old, very sad library. It coats your tongue, sticks to the roof of your mouth. You try to chew, but there's nothing to chew, just this gritty powder. Swallowing is a struggle. You have to consciously force it down, a dry, scraping sensation in your throat. There's almost no taste, maybe a faint bitterness, an earthy, dead flavor. It offers absolutely no comfort, no warmth, no immediate sense of energy. It just sits there, a cold, inert lump in your stomach. You manage a few more mouthfuls, each one a victory of grim determination over utter revulsion and difficulty. Eating bark flour like this without cooking or mixing is basically just consuming complex carbohydrates in a tiny bit of roughage. It requires energy to digest and gives back very little in return, at least not immediately in a way you can feel. It's a survival food of absolute last resort, something you eat when there is nothing else, when your only alternative is waiting to die. And right now, that alternative is starting to look surprisingly easy. A quirky tidbit about surviving on such meager fare. There are historical accounts, particularly from famines or sieges, of people resorting to eating things we would consider inedible. Tree bark, leather, even boiled bones. The nutritional value is often negligible, but the act of eating something can provide a psychological boost, a feeling of actively trying to survive, even if the physical benefits are minimal or non-existent. It's the ritual of consuming that can momentarily push back against the creeping despair. Historians still argue whether the psychological impact of having some form of food, however unappetizing or low in calories, significantly prolonged life in extreme famine conditions compared to having nothing at all. Was it the slight caloric intake, the mechanical act of eating, or simply the hope that it represented? For you, struggling to swallow this gritty bark, it's hard to feel much hope. It feels more like a penance. You push the pouch away. You can't force yourself to eat anymore right now. The effort was immense, the reward non-existent. You slump back against the freezing rock wall of your alcove. Your eyes close for a moment. Just a moment. But the urge to keep them closed, to just drift, is powerful. A mainstream historical fact. Extreme cold significantly increases the body's caloric needs. You need more energy just to stay warm. Starvation or severe calorie restriction in freezing temperatures is a deadly combination, as the body lacks the fuel to maintain core temperature. This is why historical accounts of survival in cold climates often highlight the desperate search for food as paramount, sometimes even over shelter, because without energy, shelter is just a cold box to die in faster. Your current state, bald, hungry, and exhausted, is exactly this dangerous confluence of factors. Every calorie you burned scraping bark or trying to make a fire was precious, and you're not replenishing them adequately. The thought of moving again, of trying anything, reinforcing the shelter, attempting fire again, looking for more bark even, feels utterly impossible. The energy is gone, replaced by this heavy inertia. Your muscles ache, your head feels light, and the cold seems to be tightening its grip, squeezing the life out of you slowly, methodically. The silence of the snowstorm outside feels absolute, insulating you from the rest of the world, trapping you in this small, cold bubble of misery. You try to distract yourself, think of something warm, a crackling fire, a hot drink, a soft bed. The images are faint, hazy, like memories from another life. They don't feel real. This cold, this hunger, this apathy, this feels real. This is your reality now. Just the cold, the grit of bark flour on your tongue, and the heavy, seductive pull towards simply stopping. It's a quiet, boring kind of suffering. No drama, no heroics, just the slow, steady surrender to the elements. Your body is a machine running out of fuel. in an environment designed to drain it faster. The bark flower was a futile attempt to refill the tank with dust. It's not working. You shiver again, a deep internal tremor. The ground beneath you feels harder, colder. You shift slightly, trying to find a less uncomfortable position, but it's no use. Every position is uncomfortable. Every position is cold. The desire to just curl up and sleep is overwhelming now. Just a short nap, you tell yourself. Just rest your eyes. It feels like the most logical, most appealing thing in the world. It feels like the only escape. That pull towards sleep intensifies, a heavy blanket smothering your thoughts. It's not a gentle, cozy urge like being tucked into a warm bed. This is a dull, insistent drone, a siren song promising an end to the aching cold and the gnawing emptiness. Your eyelids feel incredibly heavy, like someone has taped small weights to them. You force them open, but the world outside your small alcove seems dimmer, less defined. The snow is still falling, a silent, hypnotic curtain. Every breath is shallow, a small, careful intake of the biting air. Your fingers and toes are past the point of aching. They feel distant, alien appendages. There's a strange tingling, followed by a lack of sensation that's more unsettling than the pain was. This is apparently the body deciding that keeping your core warm is more important than negotiating with your extremities. It's a sensible, if slightly ruthless, internal committee meeting. Sacrifice the fingers, they probably declared, banging tiny gavels made of ice. Your mind isn't quite right. Thoughts are fragmented, difficult to hold on to. You might find yourself thinking about something completely random. The pattern on your grandmother's wallpaper, the name of a childhood pet, the exact steps required to make a perfect cup of tea, milk first, water first. Historians still argue whether that choice is a sign of true civilization or utter barbarism. These thoughts drift in and out, offering no solace, just further distraction from the grim reality. The bark flower you forced yourself to eat earlier feels like a cold, indigestible lump. It hasn't provided any warmth, any noticeable energy boost. It just sits there, a monument to your desperate, futile effort. The brief moment of activity required to consume it seems to have drained more energy than it possibly could have provided. It's a negative return on investment, survival edition. Maybe next time you'll try boiling snow and calling it artisanal cold soup. It would probably offer similar nutritional value. The cold starts to play tricks on your senses. The wind outside seems to whisper your name, or perhaps just mocking laughter. Shapes in the snowdrift shift and morph. You might see brief flashes of light or hear distant sounds that aren't there. This is your brain, deprived of warmth and glucose, starting to freelance. It's trying to entertain itself before the main show is over. Hey, remember sunshine? It might project onto the back of your eyelids. Remember warmth? Liar. A quirky tidbit about extreme cold exposure. In the final stages of hypothermia, a phenomenon sometimes called paradoxical undressing can occur. People become confused, feel suddenly hot, and begin taking off their clothes just before succumbing. It's a grim, final act of disorientation, the body's thermostat going completely haywire. Thankfully, you are far from that point. You are acutely, painfully aware of how cold you are, clinging to every layer you have. The desire to close your eyes is a physical ache now, a relentless pressure behind your eyeballs. Just 5 minutes, you bargain with yourself. Just lean back and rest for a moment. It seems so reasonable. It feels like the only logical next step. But you know deep down that giving in completely is dangerous. It's a slippery slope covered in black ice. A mainstream historical fact. Many accounts of death by exposure in cold climates describe the victim becoming increasingly lethargic, confused, and finally succumbing peacefully in their sleep. Unlike dramatic, painful deaths, freezing to death is often characterized by a slow, quiet fading of consciousness as the body's systems shut down. The struggle gives way to apathy, then drowsiness, and finally unconsciousness. This makes the urge to sleep incredibly insidious. It feels like a release, not a threat. You try to focus on something, anything to stay awake. The rough texture of the rock against your back, the faint metallic taste in your mouth that isn't from the bark flower. The way the snowflakes seem to fall in slow motion just outside your makeshift entrance. You count them. 1, 2, 3. Your mind wanders. What was the largest snowflake ever recorded? Probably not relevant right now. Why do they all look the same but are supposedly unique? These are the profound questions your hypothermic brain is tackling. It's like a very cold, very low-budget philosophy seminar. You shift again, trying to get circulation back into your limbs, but the movement is stiff and painful. Your muscles feel like solid cords. Shivering has mostly stopped, which is a bad sign. The body is conserving its last reserves of energy, giving up on trying to generate heat through involuntary spasms. The silence feels deeper now, broken only by the faint sound of the wind and your own slow, careful breathing. The world outside your small bubble of cold seems to have ceased to exist. Historians still argue whether the cessation of shivering in extreme cold indicates the body giving up entirely, or if it's a final desperate attempt to conserve energy by prioritizing vital organ function over futile muscle activity. For you, it just feels like another system has gone offline. One less thing your body is bothering to do. It's incredibly boring. No dramatic shudders, just stopping. You think back to the initial moments of this situation. The misplaced confidence, the underestimation of the elements, the scraping of the bark, which felt like a proactive step towards survival. Now, even that memory feels distant and slightly absurd. Bark flower. Seriously? It's less a food and more a symbol of utter, complete desperation. Eating it was less about gaining energy and more about simply having something, anything, to put in your mouth to feel like you were still participating in the act of living. The air feels heavy, thick with moisture from the falling snow. It seems to leach the last vestiges of warmth from you. You are a heat source in a vast, cold sink, and the heat is rapidly dissipating. There is no external fire to fight against the cold, only the tiny, flickering internal spark that is being steadily extinguished. You lean your head back, resting it against the cold rock. Just for a moment. The darkness behind your closed eyelids is inviting. It promises an end to the discomfort, a respite from the gnawing hunger and the relentless cold. It feels like the easiest thing in the world to just let go, to drift. The survival instinct is still there, a faint whisper, but the urge to surrender is a booming chorus. It's a battle you're not sure you have the energy to win anymore. Not today, not against this quiet, persistent, boring enemy. The cold is not a raging beast. It's a slow, patient thief, picking your pockets of energy, hope, and consciousness one by one. And it's very good at its job. Your mind drifts, pulled under by the heavy current of fatigue and cold. But then, unexpectedly, there's a sudden little spark. Not energy, definitely not energy. That ship sailed a while back on a sea of half-digested bark flower. No, this is a moment of weird clarity, a tiny island of detached thought floating in the general fog. It's like your brain decided, okay, fine, we're shutting down the heating and most vital functions, but we still have just enough juice left for one final, completely irrelevant philosophical query. You might find yourself pondering the inherent meaninglessness of scraping bark in a snowstorm when the snowstorm is clearly winning. Or perhaps you'll have a sudden, crystal-clear memory of a specific conversation from years ago, word for word, complete with the facial expressions of the other person, while simultaneously forgetting what you ate for breakfast this morning, if you even ate breakfast. It's a strange, disorienting mix, extreme confusion punctuated by moments of almost unsettling lucidity about trivial things. Like, you might suddenly have a profound realization about why squirrels bury nuts. It's not just instinct, you think with surprising certainty. It's a form of basic financial planning. Diversification of assets. They're little furry economists preparing for future market fluctuations in the Acorn Nutberry Index. This thought feels incredibly important for precisely 3 seconds before dissolving back into the general hum of cold and nothingness. It's the kind of deep thinking usually reserved for 3 a.m. when you can't sleep, Only now it's happening because you really want to sleep, but know you probably shouldn't. This paradoxical clarity, where the brain seems to offer up strange insights or vivid, out-of-context memories, while other, more crucial functions are failing, is apparently a thing that can happen under extreme stress or deprivation. It's like your cognitive filing cabinet got tipped over, and while most of the important stuff is scattered everywhere, a few random folders landed right on top, easily accessible. Oh, look, your brain seems to say. Here's that time you wore mismatched socks. Let's dwell on that for a bit while the rest of the body slowly checks out. A mainstream historical fact. There are numerous accounts from explorers and soldiers in extreme cold environments who described experiencing vivid hallucinations or moments of strange, irrational behavior just before succumbing to hypothermia. These aren't necessarily full-blown delusions, but often involve seeing familiar people, feeling sudden warmth, or having peculiar, illogical thoughts take hold with immense conviction. It seems the brain really does start to generate its own reality show when the external one gets too boringly harsh. You try to focus on the cold, the immediate reality, but even that feels distant sometimes. The aching numbness in your extremities. Is it still there? You can't quite tell. It's like they've sent their complaints to voicemail. Unable to connect at this time, the body's internal phone tree informs you. Please try your core temperature later. The snow continues its silent, steady descent outside. It's beautiful in a completely indifferent, soul-crushing sort of way. Each flake is supposedly unique, a tiny, intricate crystal structure forged in the frigid upper atmosphere. Historians still argue whether it's more depressing to think about the sheer, uncountable number of unique snowflakes that fall pointlessly on uninhabited wilderness, or to contemplate the fact that most of them just land on other boring snowflakes and lose their individuality instantly. Either way, not exactly a cheerful thought to warm you up. Another strange thought pops in: the chemical composition of bark flower. Lignin, cellulose, some trace minerals. Things your body is emphatically not designed to digest. It's basically like trying to eat a very dry, very boring piece of cardboard. Only cardboard probably has more structural integrity after you've chewed it. Remember that moss bread ration from a previous adventure? That was a gourmet meal compared to this wood pulp experience. At least moss had the decency to be vaguely organic in a way that felt slightly less like you were consuming furniture polish. A quirky tidbit: certain types of trees, particularly pines and birches, were historically used by various cultures in survival situations, not just for the inner bark, cambium layer, but sometimes even for boiling needles to make a vitamin C-rich tea. This provides a small, cold comfort that somebody managed to get some nutritional value out of trees in winter. Your current method feels less like ancient wisdom and more like primal desperation mixed with a complete lack of culinary skill. You are essentially a very slow beaver with an existential crisis and no dam-building talents. You shift again, trying to find a position that is less uncomfortable, less cold. It's a futile exercise. Every angle offers the same relentless chill. Your sleeping bag, designed for slightly less apocalyptic conditions, feels less like insulation and more like a thin, decorative drape now. It's bravely fighting the good fight, but it's severely outmatched. It's like bringing a teacup to a forest fire. Bless its cotton socks. The moments of clarity are often accompanied by a strange sense of detachment. You can observe your own situation as if from a distance. Look at that poor sod, you might think, referring to yourself. Huddled in a rock alcove, slowly freezing, ate tree bark. What a terribly boring way to go. There's no panic in this observation, just a quiet, almost academic interest in your own demise. It's like watching a documentary about someone else's unfortunate adventure. You're intellectually engaged, but emotionally, not so much. This detachment is arguably more unsettling than pure fear would be. Fear is a sign the body is still trying to fight, still reacting. This quiet acceptance, this ability to view your predicament with cool, clinical interest, feels like a sign that the system is preparing for final shutdown. The emergency alarms are being silenced. The call is being routed to an offshore data center that doesn't really care. You notice the sound of your own breathing again. It's still shallow, still careful. The air burns slightly in your lungs with every inhale. The small pocket of air inside your sleeping bag must be slightly warmer than the air outside. But the difference is negligible. A single degree fighting against 40 below. It's like trying to heat an ice rink with a birthday candle. An impressive effort by the candle, but ultimately pointless. The paradoxical thoughts return. Why is the universe so big? What happens to lost socks? Is it possible to feel nostalgic for warmth while you are still technically alive but freezing? These are the big questions, apparently. Your brain is like a dying old computer, randomly opening files from decades ago while struggling to run the basic operating system. It's almost fascinating. Almost. Mostly it's just exhausting and cold. Very, very cold. Okay, you found your slightly less bad spot. It's a cavity, maybe big enough to crouch in or curl up in a fetal position. Shielded partially by the rock and the piled snow. It's not the Ritz, it's barely a 1-star rating on the places to avoid dying in a blizzard guide, but it's objectively better than standing fully exposed. The wind is still here, a constant, mournful howl, but it's less of a direct assault and more of a persistent, chilling caress. You can feel the difference instantly, a slight easing of the pressure, a minuscule drop in the wind chill that feels like a miracle. First things first, you try to make it slightly more hospitable. With numb fingers, you attempt to clear some of the loose snow that's drifted into the cavity. It's slow work, your hands clumsy and aching, but every scoop or sweep helps a little. You use your hands, maybe a gloved fist, or even the edge of that less than useful backpack you're hauling. The snow is cold, obviously, but it's also dry and powdery, getting everywhere. You manage to create a slightly deeper, slightly less snow-filled hollow to settle into. It's maybe ankle deep now instead of knee deep in the immediate shelter spot. Progress. Baby steps, or in this case, baby scoops. As you settle in, pulling your legs up tight against your chest, you immediately feel the cold start to seep deeper. When you were moving, your body was generating heat. Now that you've stopped, that internal furnace is banking its fires. The cold rock behind you feels like an ice pack, and the air, even slightly shielded, is biting. This is the tricky part of finding shelter. You stop moving, you get colder, faster. It's a cruel joke by Mother Nature. Here, have a break. Now freeze. Thanks, universe. Really appreciate it. You try to assess your situation. You've got your layers, thank goodness. You pull your hood tighter, cinch any drawstrings, make yourself as small a target for the cold air as possible. Remember that totally delicious bark flower you were planning to make? That seems like a goal from another dimension now. The immediate goal is just not turning into a human popsicle. Your fingers ache inside your gloves. Your toes feel distant and unresponsive. This is where you start wiggling them frantically, hoping to feel something, anything besides that deep, numb cold. Historically, people surviving extreme cold understood the critical importance of minimizing heat loss. Inuit people, for instance, developed incredibly effective layering systems using animal furs, often with the fur inwards for insulation and outwards for wind protection. They also utilized ingenious design in their shelters, from igloos trapping warm air to karmets, sod houses, insulated with earth and snow. Your strategy of wearing 3 sweaters and a slightly too thin jacket feels less sophisticated by comparison. It's like bringing a butter knife to a polar bear fight. Technically a tool, but probably not the right one. You become acutely aware of your breathing. It's shallow, rapid, and produces little puffs of condensation that hang in the frigid air before dissipating. Your nose feels like it's trying to run away from your face, and your lips are probably chapped beyond recognition. Every slight shift in position sends a jolt of cold through a previously warm spot. This is where patience and stillness become your best friends. Any unnecessary movement wastes precious energy. You try to become one with the rock, a frozen barnacle clinging to a sub-zero reef. A quirky tidbit about extreme cold is that it can sometimes make you feel deceptively warm just before hypothermia sets in, a phenomenon known as paradoxical undressing, where people near death from cold inexplicably remove their clothes. Your current feeling is the exact opposite. You want to add more layers, perhaps even the bark off a nearby tree if you thought it would help. You're not feeling warm and fuzzy. You're feeling cold and wanting to curl up into a thermal ball and just disappear. You look out past the limited protection of your alcove. The blizzard is still raging. The white is relentless. The visibility minimal. You can't see more than a few feet in any direction. The world is reduced to the small, cold pocket you're in. There's no sign of relief, no break in the storm. This is it for now. Your plans of finding a nice stand of pines or a suitable birch tree seem laughably ambitious from this vantage point. Just staying put, trying not to shiver uncontrollably, feels like a monumental task. Historians still argue whether psychological resilience or practical skills are more crucial for long-term survival in harsh environments. Right now, you're leaning heavily on psychological resilience because your practical skills mostly extend to knowing how to order takeout and finding the Netflix remote. Your main skill at this moment is convincing yourself that this situation is temporary, that the storm will pass, that you aren't actually going to become a permanent part of the Finnish landscape. It's a pep talk you repeat internally, a quiet mantra against the wind's roar. You are not a snow sculpture. You are not a snow sculpture. You try to make yourself a little more comfortable, shifting your weight, trying to find a position that doesn't immediately send pins and needles through a limb. Maybe you can use your backpack as a cushion or lean against the rock just so. Every minor adjustment is an experiment in reducing discomfort in an overwhelmingly uncomfortable situation. It's like trying to get comfortable on an airplane seat designed by sadists, but colder and with a much higher chance of freezing to death. You're tucked into this minimal depression in the rock face, the wind a little less biting perhaps, but the cold is still your constant companion. It's like sharing a tiny studio apartment with someone who just came from the Arctic and refuses to take off their frozen coat. You try to make the space slightly more livable. Maybe you pile some loose snow around the edges of the cavity opening, not inside, but as a sort of makeshift barrier to block drifting snow, and maybe, just maybe, reduce the wind swirl a little. It's mostly performative, honestly. The blizzard is too powerful for your little snow walls to do much more than look vaguely like you tried. You pat the snow down with your gloves, feeling the grainy texture, the tiny ice crystals. It's a futile effort, but it gives you something to do besides just huddle and shiver. It's survival cosplay at this point. You try to think about improving the shelter further, but the reality is you don't have tools. You don't have materials. You have hands, a backpack with questionable contents, mostly that glorious bark flower you still haven't consumed, and a whole lot of cold. Any significant shelter building is out of the question in these conditions with your current resources. You can only really huddle, try to minimize movement, and let your body heat do its best to warm the tiny pocket of air immediately surrounding you. It's a losing battle, of course, as the cold leaches away your warmth into the rock and the air, but it's the only battle you can fight right now. Speaking of body heat, you think about tactics, curling up tight like a frozen shrimp, pulling your knees to your chest, burying your face in your jacket, anything to reduce the surface area exposed to the cold. You remember hearing about survival techniques where people huddle together for warmth. Not an option right now, obviously, unless you count your backpack as a huddle buddy. It's not generating any heat though, just sitting there, possibly containing a future, potentially digestible meal of tree bark. Exciting. As you wait, huddled in this tiny nook, your mind starts to drift. What happens after the storm? Assuming you make it through the night, what's the plan? You can't stay here indefinitely. You need to find proper shelter, a way back, or at least a better source of food than bark. The immediate goals shift from survive the next 5 minutes to survive the next 5 hours, and then tentatively, fearfully, to strive until the storm stops. When the blizzard finally eases, if it eases, you'll need to move. Where to? Back the way you came? Probably not. You were lost then. Further into the unknown? Maybe if it looks like there's a more sheltered valley or a stand of dense trees. You have no map, no compass beyond the unreliable sun you haven't seen in ages. It's going to be a best guess scenario based on instinct and whatever minimal visual cues emerge when the snow stops flying horizontally. The thought is exhausting. Planning a route when you're not sure which way is up, down, or sideways feels like trying to do calculus in a sensory deprivation tank filled with ice water. Historically, large-scale survival events, like the Donner Party ordeal, involved immense planning and difficult choices about when and where to move. Their decision to attempt the Hastings Cutoff, a supposedly shorter but unproven route, proved disastrous. They got trapped by early snow in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Your current situation feels a bit less dramatic scale-wise, but the principle is similar. Making the wrong decision about travel in extreme conditions can be fatal. You just have to hope your eventual best guess isn't your personal Hastings Cutoff. You check your minimal supplies again, mostly out of boredom. The empty water bottle, the half-eaten energy bar from a forgotten era, and the bag of questionable flour. It's not exactly a well-stocked larder. You think about the bark flower again. When the storm stops, finding a suitable tree to process, a birch, traditionally, will be a priority if you can't find anything else. You'd need to find a way to process it too. Drying, grinding, all things that require conditions much different from being buried in a snowdrift. It's a plan, technically, but it feels like planning a gourmet meal when you only have one ingredient: dirt. A quirky thought comes to mind. During prolonged periods of survival, people have eaten truly desperate things. Aside from bark, history records instances of people eating leather boots, softened by boiling, moss, lichen, and even things far, far less palatable, which we won't dwell on. Your bark flower in that context starts to sound almost appealingly traditional. Almost like a terrible, grainy, possibly non-nutritious traditional dish. Grandma used to make this when the famine hit. You try to gauge the passage of time. It's impossible. The light, what little there is filtering through the storm, seems constant. The wind howls without pause. Minutes could be hours. Hours could be days. You resist the urge to check your phone, assuming it even has battery and signal. It's just a hunk of cold metal now, a relic from a different life where time was marked by appointments and notifications, not by the slow creep of hypothermia. Historians still argue whether the ability to adapt to changing circumstances or adherence to a predetermined plan is more beneficial in long-term survival scenarios. Right now, you're stuck between a rock and a snow place, unable to do much of either. You can adapt by huddling, but you can't adapt by, say, building a snow cave because you lack the means and the energy. You can make a plan for later, but you can't stick to it because you don't know what later will look like or when it will arrive. It's a philosophical quandary you really don't have the mental bandwidth for. Your brain is mostly focused on cold and make it stop. You close your eyes, trying to conserve energy, trying to just be. The sounds of the storm are overwhelming. The roar of the wind, the hiss of the snow, the occasional groan of the rock under the pressure of the elements. It's a symphony of misery. You focus on your breathing, shallow and quick. Try to deepen it, slow it down. It helps a tiny bit, a small anchor in the chaos. This waiting feels endless. It's the most boring part of survival, isn't it? Not the dramatic struggle, but the long, cold, monotonous hours spent just trying not to die. No heroic feats, just stillness and cold. It's like being stuck in the world's worst waiting room, except there's no receptionist to tell you how much longer it will be, and the only snack is imaginary bark crisps. You think about the trees out there, the source of your potential future meal. Bare, probably swaying violently in the wind. Are they shedding bark naturally? Probably not in this weather. You'd have to scrape or cut it. With what? Your fingernails? The edge of your defunct phone? Again, future problems for a potentially non-existent future you. Right now, the priority is just staying warm, relatively speaking, in this little nook. It's not much, but it's all you have, and the storm shows no sign of letting up. And then, subtly at first, it happens. The ceaseless, furious roar of the wind. It doesn't stop, not entirely, but it changes pitch. It lowers. The high-frequency shriek diminishes, replaced by a deeper, less violent moan. The drumming of snow against the rock face isn't a constant barrage anymore. It starts to come in gusts, with quieter moments in between. It's like the blizzard is taking a very long, ragged breath. You almost don't believe it. You hold your own breath, listening intently over the pounding of blood in your ears. Is it a trick? A temporary lull before it decides to really punish you? Slowly, cautiously, you uncurl a little. Your muscles ache, stiff from hours of forced stillness in the cold. Every movement feels like cracking ancient pottery. You try to stretch your fingers inside your gloves, then flex your toes inside your boots. Pins and needles zing through you, a not unwelcome sign that things haven't frozen solid just yet. The change in the storm is undeniable now. The sustained fury is gone. It's still windy, still snowing, but the violence has ebbed. The pressure on your little rock nook feels less intense. You dare to shift your weight and peer outwards. It's still dim, the light muted by cloud cover and the lingering snow, but you can see further. The swirling, blinding white veil is thinning. You can make out shapes now, vague outlines of rocks and snowdrifts closer by. The air, while still bitingly cold, feels less like tiny knives being thrown at your face and more like, well, like being inside a freezer that's slightly less enthusiastic about its job. Taking a deeper breath, you push yourself up just enough to get a better look. The landscape is transformed. Everything is blanketed in deep snow, drifts sculpted by the wind into strange, undulating shapes. Your little depression in the rock face looks even more insignificant now, a tiny scar on a vast white canvas. The wind still whips tendrils of snow across the surface, but you can see the ground, or rather, the snow covering the ground, stretching away. There's an overwhelming silence compared to the storm's peak. The quiet is punctuated only by the residual wind and the occasional soft thump as a clump of snow falls from an unseen branch or ledge. It's a heavy, muffled silence, the kind you only get after a really significant snowfall. It makes you feel utterly isolated, like the world outside your immediate vicinity has ceased to exist. You look for landmarks, for anything that looks familiar. But the snow has erased everything. The terrain is subtly different under the drifts. That rock shape you thought you recognized yesterday? Gone, buried under meters of white. It's like hitting the reset button on the landscape. Your sense of direction, already shaky, feels completely useless now. It's a blank slate, which sounds poetic but is actually just terrifying when you're lost and cold. Is there a direction that looks less bleak? A potential route? You scan the horizon, if you can even call it that, through the lingering snow and mist. Maybe the snow seems less deep over there, towards what might be a ridge. Or perhaps there's a darker patch that suggests a cluster of trees offering some shelter. It's hard to tell. Your eyes strain, trying to make sense of the subtle variations in the white expanse. It's like trying to find Waldo in a picture book, where every page is painted white. You think about that bark flower still in your bag. Soon you'll need to move, which means expending energy, which means needing calories. The bark flower is still a last resort, but the prospect of finding anything else in this snow-covered wilderness seems incredibly slim. It's not exactly foraging season. Unless there's a forgotten cache of energy bars buried somewhere, finding sustenance is going to be incredibly difficult. Survival manuals always mention finding food, but they rarely show you the find food step in the middle of a finished snowfield. It's usually like, step 1, find shelter. Step 2, build fire. Step 3, find edible berries. Like, oh yeah, berries just waiting under 3 meters of snow. Piece of cake. Historically, finding your way after being lost in a blizzard or whiteout conditions was incredibly challenging, even with rudimentary tools. Explorers like those in polar regions often relied on following their tracks back, but a blizzard erases all trace. Without a compass or map, using the sun is impossible under cloud cover, and stars are out of the question. Your options are limited to dead reckoning, guessing your direction and distance, or following natural features, assuming you can find any that aren't buried or look vaguely familiar. It's a stark reminder of how dependent modern navigation has made us. You can't just open Google Maps out here. You peer out again, trying to discern anything promising. And then, through a break in the still falling snow, you see it, or think you see it. Far, far in the distance, a tiny speck of darker color against the white. Is it a rock, a tree, or is it something else? Your heart gives a little flutter of something that might be hope or maybe just indigestion from contemplating the bark flower. It's too far away to be sure, too indistinct, but it's something, Buck. A focal point in the endless white. A quirky tidbit. During the exploration of the American West, many pioneers and travelers got lost, especially in winter conditions. There are numerous accounts of people following animal trails, hoping they would lead somewhere useful, or even just following the direction their horse seemed inclined to go. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Let's hope your speck isn't just a particularly large, misleading snowdrift shaped like a house. Historians still argue whether seeing a distant potential objective, however faint, provides necessary motivation or simply leads to dangerous, energy-sapping travel towards a mirage. Right now, that speck is all you have. It's a question mark on the horizon, and you have to decide, when you eventually move, if you chase the question mark or just try to go downhill, hoping to find a stream or a valley floor. For now, though, the storm is merely wounded, not dead. The wind still bites, the snow still falls, albeit less intensely. You can't just stand up and start hiking. You need to give it more time, allow the wind to perhaps sculpt the snow surface a little, maybe even wait for the clouds to break, offering a glimpse of the sun, if only to orient yourself generally south or north. You settle back down in your inadequate shelter, the change in the weather providing a new kind of tension. The passive struggle of enduring the storm is over. The active struggle of finding your way out is about to begin. It's like finishing the tutorial level of a video game only to find the actual game is much, much harder. At least in the storm, you knew your enemy, the cold, the wind, the snow. Now your enemy is the landscape itself, still, featureless, and indifferent, and that tiny speck on the horizon. Friend or foe, only time and a lot of cold will tell. You close your eyes again, the image of that distant darkness burned into your mind. It's a reason to move, a potential destination. It's something.